Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something pretty fundamental to how South Africa works, the national budget.
That's right.
And we know you, our listener, want to get a solid grasp of this, quickly, without getting totally bogged down in endless details.
Yeah, avoiding that information overload.
Exactly. So that's really our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not going to be dissecting the specifics of, say, the 2025 budget or any single year.
Right.
Instead, we're looking at the architecture, kind of the underlying legal framework, how the budget is put together, how it's managed, and ultimately how money flows.
Like understanding the blueprints before you look at the actual house.
Precisely. That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so for sources today, we're looking at key legislation,
Yeah.
right? Like the Division of Revenue Bill, the Constitution.
Correct. And government reports, like the Budget Review, give context.
Okay, great. Let's unpack this then.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin when we talk about the legal basis for the budget? It sounds like a huge topic.
It is, but I think the most logical starting point really has to be the Constitution itself.
Okay.
It provides the foundational principles for the whole financial system in South Africa.
Right.
And Section 214 is, well, it's crucial. It lays the groundwork for how nationally raised revenue gets shared.
Shared with who? Provinces and...
Exactly, with provinces and municipalities. It talks about conditional allocation.
Conditional allocations, okay.
And this immediately tells you, the budget isn't just one single pot of money managed only at the national level. There's this inherent sharing mechanism built in.
So the Constitution itself sort of mandates this sharing system.
Interesting. And these conditional allocations, what does that actually mean in practice? Are there strings attached?
There are definitely strings attached, yeah. We'll get more into the nitty-gritty of conditional allocations when we talk about the Division of Revenue Bill, because that's where it gets spelled out.
But for now, just understand that Section 214, it sets the stage. It recognizes that different levels of government, national, provincial, local, they all have financial needs, they have responsibilities.
Right.
And the Constitution says, okay, we need a formal way to distribute resources to meet those needs.
Got it. So, Constitution, high-level principle of sharing. What else in the Constitution should we keep in mind here?
Well, Section 155, specifically subsection 1, is also pretty important.
Section 155(1). Why that one?
Because it establishes the different categories of municipalities, category A, B, and C.
Ah, yes. I've seen those classifications.
Right. And you'll see them pop up again later when we look at the Division of Revenue Bill. The way funding gets allocated can actually differ depending on which category a municipality falls into.
Okay, so it affects the money flow.
It does. And it also gives you a sense of the different scales and maybe different types of responsibilities at that local level.
Right. Makes sense. Does the Constitution also say anything about who's responsible for making sure the money is spent properly, oversight and things like that?
Absolutely. Section 155, subsection 7 this time, it grants both national and provincial governments the authority, legislative and executive authority to ensure municipalities perform effectively.
Perform it effectively.
Their functions. Specifically those related to matters listed in Schedules 4 and 5 of the Constitution.
Which cover things like health, education.
Broadly, yes. Local government functions, health, education, things like that. Now, our sources today don't detail those schedules specifically, but it's important to know this section exists. It underscores that oversight role that the higher levels of government have when it comes to municipal service delivery.
Okay, so the Constitution gives us the why, the sharing principle, the different local authorities, and it hints at the oversight. Now, where does the PFMA fit in? The Public Finance Management Act. I hear that mentioned all the time.
Ah, the PFMA. Think of it as the detailed how-to guide.
The rule book.
Exactly. The Constitution sets the broad principles, the big picture. The PFMA provides the detailed rules, the procedures for actually managing public money day to day.
Okay.
And what's really interesting here is how the Division of Revenue Act, or DORA.
DORA, right, that's the yearly one.
That's the one. Passed annually to divide up the revenue. It explicitly links itself back to the PFMA and even to the Municipal Finance Management Act, the MFMA.
So it's like a hierarchy, a pyramid of financial loss.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. Constitution at the very top.
Yeah.
Then you have the PFMA with the general financial management rules. And then DORA comes along each year with the specific allocations building on those rules.
Okay.
In fact, the Division of Revenue Bill we're looking at, it states very clearly in its interpretation section that any term already defined in the PFMA or the MFMA, It keeps that same meaning in the bill.
So they all talk to each other. It creates this interconnected web.
Exactly, a web of financial legislation.
Okay, that makes sense. So when the Division of Revenue Bill, or DORA, talks about an allocation, what does it mean? Building on the Constitution and the PFMA.
Right. So the bill defines allocation quite precisely. It covers first the equitable share allocation.
Equitable share.
Yeah.
That's the general funding. No strings attached.
Generally, yeah. That's the unearmarked funding given to each sphere, national, provincial, municipal. You find the details for that in Schedules 1, 2, and 3 of the DORA for each sphere, respectively.
Okay.
But allocation also includes those conditional allocations we mentioned earlier.
Ah, okay. Back to the conditional ones.
Yeah.
Stemming from Section 214 of the Constitution. How does DORA sort of flesh those out?
Right. So the bill defines a conditional allocation as money given to a province or a municipality, specifically from the national government's share of revenue,
Okay.
for purposes outlined back in that Section 214 of the Constitution. And these specific allocations are then detailed in Schedules 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the DORA.
Wow, lots of schedules.
There are. And these schedules often specify the exact programs or projects the money must be used for. So like you said earlier, strings attached. Conditions on how it can be spent.
So it's not just a blank check handed over.
Definitely not. Sometimes these allocations aren't even cash. They can be in kind.
In kind, meaning what? Goods, services.
Exactly. The national department might provide the actual goods or services directly to the province or municipality instead of just transferring money for them to buy it.
Okay, so conditional could mean specific projects or even specific things. Very targeted.
Very targeted. It's a way to ensure money goes towards specific national priorities or functions agreed upon.
Which I suppose brings us to the different players in this whole budget process, right?
Yeah.
Who are the key people, the key entities involved? And what are their roles, their responsibilities, their powers and privileges, you could say?
Yes, absolutely. Let's delve into those key players and their powers and privileges, as you put it. We can start with the transferring officer.
Transferring officer. Okay, sounds important. Who are they?
This is the accounting officer, usually the director general of a national department, specifically one that transfers those conditional allocations we just talked about.
The ones from Schedules 4, 5, or 7.
Exactly. Those ones going to provinces or municipalities. Or, in the case of Schedule 6, the transferring officer is the one who actually spends that allocation on behalf of the province or municipality.
Okay, so they're the ones sending the money out or spending it directly in some cases. What kinds of duties do they have? It sounds pretty crucial for making sure the money actually moves.
It is crucial. They have some very specific tasks. For instance, within 14 days of the DORA taking effect each year.
Okay, pretty quick.
Yeah, they have to certify to the National Treasury that their monitoring systems, the systems they use to track these funds, are compatible with the National Treasury's own systems.
Compatibility. So everyone's on the same page with tracking.
That's the idea. It's a key oversight mechanism, making sure everyone's speaking the same financial language when tracking the money.
Makes sense. What else?
Well, if they ever need to withhold funding or stop an allocation, maybe because conditions aren't being met,
Right.
they have to submit an amended payment schedule to the National Treasury within 7 days.
Okay, quick turnaround on that, too.
And importantly, they're also responsible for evaluating the performance of the programs funded by certain allocations, specifically Schedules 5 or 6.
Evaluating performance. How?
They need to assess if the program achieved its goals, was it effective, and so on, and they have to report those evaluations back to the National Treasury within 4 months after the financial year ends.
Okay, so the transferring officer handles the transfer, ensures monitoring systems align, deals with stopping funds if needed, and evaluates performance afterwards. Busy role.
Definitely.
So who's on the receiving end then? Who gets these allocations?
That would generally be the receiving officer.
Receiving officer, okay.
Now, if that conditional allocation schedule 4, 5, or 7 goes to a municipality, the receiving officer is the municipality's own accounting officer, usually the municipal manager. If the allocation goes to a province, it's referred to as the receiving provincial department, and their accounting officer takes responsibility.
And do they have specific duties too, beyond just, receiving the money?
Oh, yes. They have reporting duties. For example, those receiving funds from specific grants like the Education Infrastructure Grant or the Health Facility Revitalization Grant, they have to submit quarterly reports on how they're doing with filling posts in their infrastructure units. It's quite specific.
Very specific. Shows how targeted these conditions can be.
Exactly. And maybe more broadly, municipalities that get these Schedule 4, 5, or 7 allocations must prepare their financial statements and their annual reports according to the rules set out in the MFMA, the Municipal Finance Management Act.
So reporting requirements flowing both ways from the transfer and the receiver. Trying to ensure some transparency, I guess.
That's the goal, yes, transparency and accountability.
Okay, what about the big picture oversight, the coordination of all this? That sounds like a job for the National Treasury.
You got it. The National Treasury plays a really central role in overseeing this whole process.
How so?
Well, as we just mentioned, they're the ones who receive that certification from the transferring officers about compatible monitoring systems.
Right, they check that box.
They do. They can also decide on the format that receiving officers in municipalities must use when they report on conditional allocations.
Why would they do that? Just bureaucracy.
Well, it helps with standardizing the information, makes it easier for Treasury to monitor across the board, and for auditors to do their work if everyone's reporting in a similar way.
Okay, that makes practical sense.
Yeah.
What else is Treasury involved in?
They have significant power when things go wrong. If allocations are withheld or stopped by a transferring officer, the National Treasury has to approve any amended payment schedule. They have the final say on that change.
So there are gatekeepers there. They seem to hold quite a bit of power in this system.
They do, yeah.
Given that significant control, I mean, are there checks and balances? What stops potential overreach or, bias in their decisions?
That's a really important question. And yes, while the National Treasury has significant responsibility, their actions are meant to happen within the legislative framework. They don't have unlimited power.
For example?
Okay, so say a Schedule 4 or 5 allocation going to a province gets stopped before deciding how to maybe reallocate those funds to the affected municipality.
Well, if they decide to reallocate it.
Right. The National Treasury consults with the original transferring officer and also the relevant provincial treasury.
Ah, consultation. So it's not a unilateral decision?
Supposedly not. That consultation process provides a degree of checks and balances. They also have the power to offset funds.
Offset, like clawback money.
Kind of. If a province or a municipality owes money back to the National Revenue Fund, maybe unspent conditional grants, and they don't pay it back on time, Treasury can basically deduct that amount from future transfers going to them.
Okay, a financial tool to enforce repayment.
Precisely. And there's another specific scenario if there is a disagreement within a district between the Category B and C municipalities.
The different types we mentioned earlier.
Right. If they disagree on how some provisional allocations should be split between them, the National Treasury makes the final call. But again, only after consulting with the provincial treasury.
So consultation seems key.
It's built into the process in several places. Treasury also receives the final allocation submissions from all the transferring officers, and critically, they provide the actual payment system used for all these transfers, equitable share, and conditional grants to municipalities.
Wow, okay. They really are central. In the thick of it, managing the systems, the approvals, the disputes.
Very much so.
What about the provincial treasury then? You mentioned them being consulted. What's their main role?
The provincial treasury acts as a key intermediary and an oversight body, but at the provincial level.
Connecting national and local.
In many ways, yes. As we said, National Treasury consults them when stopping or reallocating certain funds within their province. They also get notified by National Treasury if conditional allocations are being withheld from entities in their province.
So they're kept in the loop.
They should be, yes. And in that dispute scenario between municipalities, they're consulted before National Treasury decides. Plus, remember those specific quarterly reports for the education, infrastructure, and health facility grants?
Yeah.
The provincial treasury receives those reports for the entities within their province. So they're a vital link, really, in the information flow and in some of the decision-making.
Okay. A crucial link between national directives and provincial or local implementation. Got it. What about the political level? Where do the ministers fit into this picture? The Minister of Finance, for example.
Right. The Minister of Finance at the national level holds the ultimate authority under the Act, but they can delegate.
Delegate powers.
Yes, they can delegate powers and assign duties related to the Division of Revenue Act to officials within the National Treasury.
So hand tasks off to the Director General or other Treasury officials.
Exactly. However, the minister also retains the power to, vary or even revoke decisions made through that delegation.
So they can step back in.
They can, but the Act usually says they have to respect any rights that might have already become vested as a result of the delegated decision. You can't just pull the rug out completely if someone has already acted based on it.
Okay, some protection there.
Yeah.
Is it similar at the provincial level?
Very similar. The MEC for finance in a province can delegate the powers and assign the duties that fall to the provincial treasury under the act.
To officials within their own provincial treasury.
Correct. Same principle of delegation applies.
Okay, so we have this clear chain of responsibility. Delegation is possible. Now, how does this whole complex system actually ensure that everyone, plays by the rules, that the money is used appropriately? What are the main mechanisms for compliance and accountability?
There are several key mechanisms woven through the door and related acts. We've already touched on some.
Like the monitoring systems?
Exactly. That requirement for transferring officers to certify their monitoring systems are compatible with treasuries. That's one check.
Okay.
Reporting is huge. Receiving provincial departments, for example, have to submit annual reports.
And your reports on what?
Detailing their compliance with the door itself. They need to outline steps they took if there was non-compliance. And, crucially, report on whether the allocated funds actually achieved their intended objectives. Did the grant work?
Performance reporting again.
Yes. And perhaps one of the most direct tools is withholding funds.
The stick rather than the carrot.
You could say that. The National Treasury can withhold conditional allocations if the specified conditions aren't being met by the province or municipality.
Can they just do that unilaterally?
No, there's a process. They have to notify the relevant provincial MEC for finance and also the provincial department responsible for local government before they withhold the funds. Give them warning, essentially.
Okay, so there's a warning step. It's not completely arbitrary.
Correct. It's a significant step, so there are procedural safeguards.
So it sounds like there's a system of checks, reporting, and the threat of withholding funds as a motivator.
Absolutely. And beyond those specific points, there are often very detailed reporting requirements baked into the conditions for individual grants. You'll see requirements for, say, monthly financial reports, quarterly performance reports.
Depends on the grant, I suppose.
It often does. And as we heard with transferring officers, that requirement for annual evaluations of programs funded by conditional grants, those also have to be submitted to National Treasury.
So you get a look back at effectiveness.
Right. It allows for a retrospective look at whether the spending actually achieved what it was supposed to. Of course.
There's always a but.
Well, yes. While the system looks pretty comprehensive on paper, a recurring challenge you often hear is actually ensuring the quality and the timeliness of all these reports from all the different levels of government. Enforcement can be tricky.
Right. Having the rules is one thing, making sure they're followed effectively is another. Okay, it sounds like a fairly, maybe rigid system in some ways.
Yeah.
Are there any mechanisms for flexibility? Can amendments be made if things don't go exactly to plan?
Yes, there is some built-in flexibility, thankfully. Things don't always go perfectly according to plan.
Like what?
Well, we already mentioned the process for amending payment schedules if funds are withheld or stopped. That's one type of adjustment.
Okay.
Importantly, there's also the possibility of reallocating funds that were stopped.
Taking money stopped from one place and giving it somewhere else.
Potentially, yes. If funds meant for one municipality are stopped, under certain conditions, Treasury, after consultation, remember, might be able to reallocate that money to other municipalities that can use it effectively for a similar purpose.
But are there limits on that?
Yes, usually it has to happen within the same financial year, and often it has to be for the same type of allocation or grant program. You can't just shift infrastructure money to salaries, for example.
Okay, reallocation is possible but constrained. Any other flexibilities?
Provinces also have some scope. They can request amendments to their approved business plans for conditional grants.
If circumstances change.
Exactly. Maybe costs change or priorities shift slightly. But again, there are rules. These requests usually have to be made within specific timeframes.
Deadlines.
Deadlines, yes. And they typically require approval from the national transferring officer, and sometimes even the minister might need to sign off depending on the significance of the change.
So it acknowledges that reality can change,
Yeah.
but still keeps control within the overall framework.
That's the balance it tries to strike, yes. Allowing for some adaptation without losing sight of the original objectives and accountability.
Okay. This has been incredibly helpful, actually. Understanding this framework, it really helps you as a citizen start to see how the government is supposed to manage public funds.
Right.
And what mechanisms, at least on paper, are in place for accountability. It clarifies the legal and institutional landscape.
Absolutely. We've traced the connections, haven't we? from the Constitution setting the foundation
Yeah, the very principles.
to the PFMA providing the general financial management rules,
The how-to guide.
and then the Annual Division of Revenue Act, making those specific allocations and really detailing the roles, the responsibilities, the powers and privileges of all these different players we discussed.
Transferring officers, receiving officers, national treasury, provincial treasury, ministers.
Exactly. This deep dive was really aimed at giving you that foundational understanding of that system, how it's structured.
Focusing on those powers and privileges within the different government entities managing the money.
Right. And it is, as you can tell, a pretty complex system, very interconnected, designed ultimately to ensure public funds are managed responsibly and used to address the country's needs.
And as you can probably appreciate listening to this, we've really only scratched the surface, haven't we?
Oh, definitely. You could do whole deep dives just on specific grants, or get right into the weeds of the Municipal Finance Management Act, the MFMA. That would reveal even more layers.
For sure.
Which I think raises kind of important question for you, our listener, to maybe ponder.
Okay, a final thought.
Yeah. Consider how this framework we've just walked through, how it tries to balance those big national priorities with the very specific, often different needs of provinces and local communities on the ground.
That tension between central direction and local reality.
Exactly. What challenges do you think might naturally arise in a system with so many layers? National, provincial, local, all interacting.
Communication issues, delays,
Yeah,
competing priorities.
could be all of those.
Yeah.
And what does this whole structure tell us about that inherent tension, maybe, between wanting strong central control and oversight versus needing efficiency and responsiveness at the local level where services are actually delivered?
Yeah, finding that sweet spot between control and letting people get on with the job.
Precisely. How do the mechanisms we've discussed, the reporting, the conditions, the potential withholding of funds, how do they try to manage that tension? And how effectively do you think they do it in practice? That's something to really think about.